Silver might take a leap forward at some point, basically when people start losing confidence in the dollar.
Silver and gold price manipulation. It's a hot subject amongst precious metals investors. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by Mr. Pat Holland from the Missouri Freedom Initiative. We're going to talk to Pat about gold and silver price manipulation. I even want to ask him, is there almost a psychological operation going on to induce volatility into the precious metals markets to dissuade people from investing? Pat, welcome to Ron's Basement.
Ron, it is so nice to be back. It's been a while. I'd like to say hello to Smitty back there, and of course the Gold Bear Barnaby as well, and a red shirt again, a 5 o'clock shadow. We're Ron's Basement all the way over here at the Missouri Freedom Initiative.
All right. Well, we appreciate you. You are a fan favorite, and of course, you're doing so much to further legal tender legislation. But when we talk about gold and silver, Pat, are we crazy to think that the price could be manipulated?
Nope, we're not crazy. In fact, it's been proven multiple times, over and over and over. The only problem is the banks, and you have to remember now, I'm thinking about J.P. Morgan. Now, I know BlackRock is in here now. But when J.P. Morgan had control of the futures market, and that's at the COMEX, they got caught more times than I can remember spoofing, all kinds of weird manipulation of gold and silver price, right? And they got fined. That's how we know that it was real. But they got fined for a tiny fraction of how much money they made doing the scandalous operation to begin with. So the government has agents working for them that's manipulating the price of gold and silver. They are not to be, brought down. They are not to be, I don't know if you want to use the word. Remember what happened to Bear Stearns?
Yes.
Their stock price dropped to almost nothing, and JP Morgan gobbled them up for Christmas. At $2 a share or something like that. But that won't happen anymore. The government has friends with the large banks, and yes, they're manipulating the price of gold and silver. And the reason is very simple. If you can push down the price of gold and silver, you can make the dollar look a little bit prettier.
That was my next question. Why? And it's because once Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, at that point, gold and silver somewhat became, for lack of a better way to say it, an enemy of the dollar. Is that an accurate statement?
A competitor with the dollar would probably be more accurate, because gold has not been suppressed in anywhere near the same fashion that silver has been. And, you could talk all day long about, well, how long, it takes to mine it, how much it costs to mine it, and everything. But we're just talking about standard inflation since the Federal Reserve, came into being. And that's in 1913. But I do believe it was 1912 or 1911 where they voted it in on Christmas. Might have been 1911. So it was a full year and some months later that the Federal Reserve came in. That's where you'll see all the charts on the internet showing the value of the dollar versus gold. It's literally insane, because we had a stable price of gold until the Federal Reserve came along. And of course they said, yeah, 100% backing, 100% backing. Well, if we had 100% backing, we didn't need the Federal Reserve. You only need the Federal Reserve if you intend to go off of gold. And what did they do? From 1913 all the way to 1971, there were several devaluations along the way. A lot of people are familiar with, of course, what FDR did. But you have to remember, there are others too. I meant, Bretton Woods, actually devalued the dollar against gold. That's what I meant to say. Anyway, there were lots of little ones along the way. And what most people don't know is when we left the gold standard in 1971, it was approximately 6% gold backing. That's it. And people don't know that. They never would have known that. But that had to do with printing versus what they claim, and I do, the air quotes, claim they had at Fort Knox. So that's, that's the etymology of it. And that's the manipulation has come in many forms, by pushing down the futures, by simply devaluing against the dollar when we were actually on a standard, and they can get away with that. But gold typically has not enjoyed the same attention on the manipulation as silver has, because a lot of rich people hold gold, and you don't want to piss off the rich people because they're donating to politicians.
Interesting. In the end, eventually, do gold and silver win? When I think
Yes.
about gold, when I think about gold and silver, I hear the term God's money, or the only real pure form of money, and I think about what's gone on, not just in the last 100 years or 50 years here in the United States, but even if I broaden the scope and look over like the last 1,000 years, the world has gone through several of these periods where there's this temporary mirage where paper becomes more valuable, where tulip bulbs become more valuable, where different things. But at the end of the day, at least if we do a brief study of history, we see that silver and gold always seem to win. Like they always rise back to the top. Is that, what are your thoughts on that, Pat?
That's absolutely correct. And that comes in between currencies. Most currencies don't last, for too long. I mean, Argentina is an example of one that lasts about, 8 to 10 years. That's it, before they have to literally print brand new currency because they print it out of thin air and they print too much of it. But when you have the world reserve currency, that typically lasts about 70 or so years, maybe 80 if you're lucky. We've gone past that. One was Bretton Woods, 1946. I'm almost positive that's the right year. Mm-hmm. So we have literally gone, we're at the 80-year mark. We're at the end. And by the way, people can look this up. I'm afraid I don't have any charts to show people. But if you look at all the reserve currencies since the literally 1600s, 1500s, they all last typically about 70 years. That's it. And then they lose it to another country and their currency becomes world reserve. Now, since we have had the world reserve currency, we've been in a perfect position to manipulate the price of gold and silver, Ron, in a unique position that no one else in the world can really do, except with the possibility of Japan or Britain, because the pound and, of course, the Japanese yen are inextricably linked to the dollar.
If you're looking to buy gold, silver, or platinum, do yourself a favor and check out PIMBEX, the online precious metals bullion dealer and sponsor of Ron's Basement. I was a happy customer before they offered to support the channel. You'll find they have the best prices, quality, and service. I think PIMBEX is best, and you will too. And be sure to tell them that you're from Ron's Basement.
And we find ourselves now, you talk about being at the end of this run as being the world reserve currency, in a situation where I think nobody, at least it's my impression, like most of our cohorts out there don't even realize this is going on. Like the amount of debt that we've acquired, the deficits that we're running. I mean, the symptoms are all there, right? Like, are we going to look back in 5 years? Are we going to look back in 5 months? Or can they keep the mirage going? But boy, when you just, apply basic mathematics to what's going on with the debt situation, with interest rate situation, the situation appears to become untenable. And it feels like crazy for a lot of us right now, because maybe it is crazy.
You're right. And I'll actually build on what you just said. Have you noticed that they always keep silver at the mining price, at the average aggregate mining price?
Yeah.
That's what they keep it at. Gold, that's not true. There's profit in mining gold. There's very little profit in mining silver. Very precious little. Silver is what they're most afraid of. It always has been. Like I've always said before, silver is much more synonymous with the dollar than gold is. Silver terrifies them. Who are them, by the way? I'm talking about the United States Treasury. I'm talking about the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I'm talking about the COMEX. They're terrified by silver. They can't let it go up. It's too valuable to be used as money in their minds. It's much more useful as an industrial metal, and it is critical, absolutely critical as an industrial metal. Gold can be replaced in the industrial process. That is not true with silver, not at its current price anyway.
Interesting. So silver actually scares them more. And it's a scary situation when you look at the silver market in general, because like you said, right now, the price of silver doesn't allow for much profit to be made by silver
That's right.
miners, certainly does not encourage any investment into exploring
That's
or
right.
developing new silver. I mean, there's very few silver developers out there, but yet we hear all the time about this explosion in demand for silver from the solar industry, from a whole host of
Yep.
other sources. What's going to happen? I mean, what happens 5 years from now?
That's a good question, because we hit peak mining silver in 2015. So virtually every mine in the world has gone down in production since 2015. And that doesn't mean all of them, but most of them. And some have been shut down, for environmental reasons, actually, some gold mines. And I suspect, and by the way, that's in South America, where there is a lot of silver. And I suspect that was because they were leaching. They were, actually low grading the mines. And that is a particularly painful process. It's an expensive process, lots of chemicals that need to be cleaned up when you're done. So I think that's probably why. If they can't low grade in certain areas of the world because of regulations, and we're talking about local government regulations, they're going to have to start going out to the sea and getting silver out of the ocean at some point. And that is dramatically going to raise the price of silver. So yes, but when do we run out? Well, the reason we haven't actually run out right now, and Ron and Pat's hair are not on fire because we can't go to our LCO and actually, our local coin store, LCS, and actually purchase silver, is largely in part because of the recycling processes. Most of this is done in China, by the way. So we send them all the stuff where silver needs to be stripped out. We pay them because it's cheaper labor in China to actually extract the silver. And eventually that will be moved to Africa, so we can keep the low wages on, basically recycling metals. We won't do it here. Any smelting process that we had in the United States is gone now. That was under Obama. The EPA did that. And that was by directives from the EPA that didn't even go through Congress. We don't even make bullets in the United States anymore. We don't smelt bullets. We send car batteries. And by the way, just a small tangent. The bullets that we make generally come from recycled car batteries, the lead plates inside of car batteries. We ship those down to Mexico, and they smelt that lead and make product out of it, not us. And that's a shame. I mean, honest to God, we're supposed to be a first world nation, yet we can't even smelt certain metals here. We can't smelt aluminum. We can't smelt lead. But the same thing comes apparently in another form, not environmental, but economic. And that has to do with recovering gold and silver from products. This recycling process is critical to actually keeping up with the demand. Now, if there were stashes somewhere, basically, I'm really not aware of it, particularly in the last 25 years, there might have been. But at the same time, it does seem all the time that we are on the precipice of running out of silver all the time. And how we never seem to actually run out actually kind of surprises me.
Yeah. And, I think that it's, according to the statistics over the last several years, like you mentioned, whatever above ground surplus was in place, at minimum, has been decreasing. You hear people, you hear people talk about, all the silverware, all the bars and coins that are held up in people's basements. But the simple math basically dictates that if we continue to consume more silver every year than the mining and recycling industries are able to supply, well, then at some point it's going to become a critical issue.
It will. It absolutely will. But when that happens, I don't know. And my crystal ball is broken. But I do know that other silver mines will probably come online that weren't worth mining when the price is right. And we have them all over the place. In fact, we have a couple of silver veins in Missouri, I think.
Yep. Yes, we do. Yep.
And down in the Boot Heel or in the southeastern part of the state. That's also where there's cobalt. So, and we'll start mining that here pretty soon, probably. I see legislation sometimes that makes me believe that that's going to happen. If they're going to do that, silver will be a byproduct, guaranteed. We do have silver in Missouri.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I can answer your question from earlier, Pat. You talked about not having a crystal ball.
Mhm.
This all was supposed to come to a head 5 years ago. So
Mhm.
we're,
Yep.
we're,
So
we're
someone's crystal ball was broken.
yes, including mine, including a
Mhm.
lot of people.
Fortuna Silver Mines is a global intermediate gold and silver producer. Since 2005, Fortuna's best in class management has delivered impressive growth and profits. Fortuna's solid financial position and operational expertise allows for performance in any precious metals price cycle and provides a foundation from which to harvest great profits in more favorable metals markets. Investing in Fortuna is an investment in quality, long-term, sustainable production of in-demand precious and base metals.
The other thing worth mentioning on that is that Mexico produces, I think, around 30% of the world's silver.
Yeah, something
And
like that.
yeah, and it's becoming very difficult to either find, or then if you find it, develop and or build a silver mine in Mexico because of political issues, social issues, and everything else. And that could provide further constraint on the supply. The other thing that I heard, it's been a while, but Ross Beatty, who's a highly respected guy in the precious metal sector, you hear this statistic that like 70% of silver is a byproduct of mining for other metals like
Mhm.
copper and zinc. And he brought up a great point. He said that has been true. However, in particular with copper, all the low-hanging fruit's been harvested. Now the new copper deposits are much deeper, and with that have less silver
That's right.
that habitate with the copper. So
That's right, because these mines are not set up for leaching.
yeah.
What we call the secondary silver mining.
Hmm.
They're not leaching. They are absolutely not low grading. And that's right. So basically, the easy to get, the low hanging fruit, as you say, was how silver was being brought into market, from mining copper. In many
Yeah.
cases, gold mines are also mining silver as well as a secondary, product. It's not their primary product, but and I just remember, I think I'm remembering a story from way back when where there was a gold mine that actually was pulling out more silver than was pulling out gold because they hit a vein. But
Right.
that story is, I'm trying to remember if that was Australia. I can't remember anymore. It didn't
Yeah.
last for too long, but they were getting pretty big hunks of silver out of there, which
Yeah.
was kind of
Yeah.
neat to see.
Yeah.
Um, and here's something that's even more complex, if I can bring it up real quick. And yes, we're
Mhm.
all we're all waiting for the manipulation to end, but the fact of the matter is, and I don't want to turn this into a political show, but we see a lot of things going on in the federal government right now that are scandalous. They're illegal, and they're certainly unethical, and it covers the entire gamut of politics. And if we think they're going to let go of silver, we got another thing coming. We have to almost wait for the dollar to die, I think, before they truly let go of silver. But let's talk about Basel III for a second.
Sure.
And it's something that probably a lot of your listeners are familiar with, but I don't think you and I have ever touched on this. And I do believe this started in 2017. And Basel III was, and there's a lot to Basel III, but it has to do with basically assets held by central banks and what they're valued at. And so consequently, in 2018, they started the process of valuing gold at a 100% market price, because previous to Basel III, it was half price. So gold is now, what is it roughly right now? It's real close to 2000. So let's say
Yep.
2000 for easy math. Gold is now valued at $2,000 in banks in America. That just started in December. Before then, they typically valued it at half price for whatever reason, half of market value. And I think that was kind of keep up the tradition that gold was it, $46.70 or something like that. It's the last time the Federal Reserve valued gold, if you remember.
Hmm.
They've been slow to step it up. But keep in mind, this operation's been going on for 6 years. So every year, there's a central bank or two that revalues gold at 100% market value. And now it's finally our turn. Oddly enough, America, the one that's manipulating the price of precious metals, is the very last on this merry-go-round around the central banks around the world with Basel III.
Mm-hmm.
So I do believe we're last, by the way. I don't think there's a whole lot left. But that's a really, really critical point for people to know, is that all this time, when we've been saving our gold and silver, for many of us for decades, most people didn't know, and probably don't know until this moment watching this video, that the central bank, the Federal Reserve, valued gold at exactly half of its market value forever, for a long time, because it was a tier 3 asset. It's been bumped up from tier 3 to tier 1 with the the inception of Basel III. So we hit our date. It was in December, and now the central bank sees gold as the market value of gold.
I don't remember seeing that on CNN, being reported on CNN, Pat.
No. CNN misses a lot of things, but so does Fox News, for that matter.
Right.
But I don't think Fox News, Neil Cavuto even touched on this.
No.
You will have to go to Ron's basement or any of the silver and gold channels to actually get this information, because this will not be in the mainstream media. Go ahead.
Well, and it has to do with the banks and like their reserve ratios, right? Like the amount of capital they need to have on their balance sheet versus, the loans and everything else. So it allows them, and I think potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, the good news for precious metals investors is that this Basel III recognizes the true value of gold and allows the banks to value it at its real price. Is that
that's correct
statement?
Okay. But if they've got gold in the safe, that gives them the ability to actually make more loans based on that gold. So think about it for a second, and once again, there are banks out there that are actually holding gold in their safes. It's not as uncommon as you may think, but it's not like they've got a whole vault full of gold. They have some gold. Particularly if they are mom and pop banks, they're going to have a reserve of gold.
Yeah.
So that, by being part of the Federal Reserve System, and there are very precious few banks in the United States that are not part of the Federal Reserve System. And these are generally bullion banks, number one, or independent mom and pop banks, or, I hate to say it, mafia banks. But those are the ones that don't subscribe to the Federal Reserve. Yeah. Those ones have always held gold. They have always, it's my opinion, of course, bullion banks are going to hold gold regardless, but mom and pop banks do as well. But now it's fully valued. I want to tell a quick story here. Regional Bank, if you're not in Missouri, you may not have heard of this. Great Southern Bank. That's where I bank. And I remember going to the teller, and this was about 2 or 3 years ago, and asked basically if I could bring in a gold coin, a gold eagle, and actually have that converted, make a payment to the bank, or trade it for cash. And they said, absolutely, we do take those. I was really excited, and I said, okay, cool. That's really neat to know. I was thinking to myself, I'm going to let everyone know in the initiative that that's the case. And so at any rate, I said, well, if I brought one here right now, how do you value it? And they said, well, it's $50. I said, no, I'm talking about a gold eagle now, and they said, yes, it says right on there, it's $50. And I said, okay. Now I was quick thinking. I said, I would like to buy every single gold eagle you have in your vault right now, every single one of them. And so she says, well, we have a different pricing structure for selling gold. And I said, well, how much would that be then? And she says, I'd have to look it up, but it's somewhere right around $1,800. Because that was, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So in 1900, I can't remember what it was. But at any rate, that's the way banks treated gold. The redheaded stepchild, the whipping boy. They value it at the amount that was printed on the coin, knowing full well that it's worth a heck of a lot more than that on the market. Of course, they celebrate it by selling it at that price.
Yeah.
So banks can't do that anymore now. So, by the way, this was a real true story. This actually did happen to me.
Wow.
And of course, I did not transact with the bank with any precious metals whatsoever, but it was interesting to get, their perspective on things. But it's a bank. of course, they're going to try and, manipulate you, not they're not manipulating gold or silver right there. They're manipulating you.
Yeah, you'll take the opposite of that deal any day, right?
Yep, that's right. I was pretty excited because I thought there was a chance I was going to get some gold out of the vault for $50 an ounce.
Yeah. Well,
and I didn't care if they had a bunch of it. I'd have taken out a loan. But it is what it is. But Basel III changed the rules here in America. How does it change the pricing structure for gold and silver? I don't know. The Federal Reserve never actually had an official, standard for silver, and what they were doing was silver, or if silver is actually a reserve in banks, which I don't think it's actually referred to as a reserve in banks. Once again, silver's the redheaded stepchild. Stay away, silver, right?
right.
Hold up that cross whenever silver comes in the room because, you're a vampire. Most bankers are, by the way. But the fact is, silver is much more critical to our civilization than gold has ever been. And silver has a longer history of being used as money than gold has, by the way. A lot of people don't know that. You can go back 5,000 years in written history and find where silver was actually being used for transactions. You can't find that with gold. Gold started probably about 3,800 years ago or something like that. Anyway. But silver was right on top of the earth, easily found, back then.
Sure.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take you off on that weird tangent, but I did want to stress the importance of Basel III.
Yeah.
Going around the world over a 6-year period, and we finally got hit on that one. Gold is now officially, according to the Federal Reserve, worth what the market says it's worth. Wow, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, imagine that. And I think when we think about gold and we think about silver, obviously you and I and the person who's joining us today, listening in on our conversation, we know the fundamental facts that support the price. And what gives me confidence, I guess I would say, is this idea that it can happen. The price and measured in dollars can go down, but to me, the opportunity to preserve wealth and maybe, if the right windows of opportunity come up, even increase wealth seem much more likely than any. It's just really hard for the real value of silver and gold to go down from where they are right now. Absolutely, there'll be price fluctuations, but when I think about real value, when I think about decades or generational, I feel good about silver. I feel good about the precious metals.
Oh, I do too. Physical, gold and silver, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I do too. And once again, the fundamentals break through from time to time. Silver might take a leap forward at some point, basically when people start losing confidence in the dollar. And now the BRICS nations are actually getting a little bit of attention in the MSM because we're supposed to hate them, right?
Right.
We have to hate any nation that doesn't want to be manipulated by the United States dollar anymore. Shame on you guys for not wanting to be slaves, to the imperial, Federal Reserve note. So, and I say that jokingly, not really. Actually, I'm saying it meaningfully. But the fact is, the dollar is dying. Whether we're in the middle of it, so we can't see it. We can't look back in history and see, the dollar dying right now. We're in the process of it right now. And it's not dying because it was a bad idea or because necessarily we printed too many of them. It's going away because foreign nations are sick and tired of how the dollar has been weaponized.
Yeah.
When the dollar dies, so will the manipulation of gold and silver. It'll break free. That's my considered opinion. I wouldn't look for any massive moves like gold to go up to $50,000 an ounce or anything like that until something like that happens. Same thing for silver.
Yeah, you hear people say, you can. I like to say, $45 silver, $65 silver. The reality is, silver could go to infinity measured in U.S. dollars.
If they print enough.
Yeah, they make us take history during our normal education process, and if we really look at history, every fiat currency has ended in failure. And I'd like to pose the question to people, like, how much does silver cost in Confederate dollars, right? I mean, a lot.
Yep.
And I don't think you or I want any challenges or difficulties for our country, but at the same time, I heard someone recently say we get paid to assess risk, and when we apply a calculator to the finances of our country and kind of what's gone on, the prospect of scary outcomes becomes a real possibility.
It does. And I know a lot of people are frustrated, and a lot of people have been waiting for, go back to the Hunt brothers. People have been waiting for gold and silver to come out from under this manipulation for a very, very long time. And actually, it was in 1971, about a month before I was born, is when Nixon took us off the gold standard. But at the same time, they were manipulating gold. I mean, if you were holding gold, it was technically illegal at the time. So, I mean, this is part of the generational experience. We have seen 2 generations go by with severe manipulation on the precious metals, particularly on silver. Yeah. And for them to have that much power for that long and do this, should actually be, a stark reminder to people that they continue to have the power as long as the dollar has value. When the dollar loses value, as you say, there's nothing they can do anymore. The free market will break open. I mean, when they're hyperinflating the dollar, and you go to the grocery store and you're buying a jar of olives, for like $100, they can't keep silver at $24, $22. They can't. There's no way. So, I mean, that's actually when you see the price of gold and silver go up. So in nominal terms, no one gets rich off of gold and silver, except for the fact that you were saving in a vehicle that literally was going up with inflation. That's the important thing, because dollar denominated assets will go down in value during, basically a hyperinflationary, as they found out in Venezuela. Remember the stories with Venezuela?
Oh, yeah.
Where I think it was an ounce of silver would buy you an entire turkey at the grocery store, as opposed to several million bolivar, the actual paper currency they had. So an ounce of silver, or like $1 million, it's actually over $1 million, if I remember right. It's like 15 million bolivar to buy that turkey, or 1 ounce of silver. Yeah. And then that seems right to us, for us to go to the grocery store, Ron, and to buy a real nice, 14, 15 pound turkey, at the grocery store. That seems like that might be something like an ounce of silver, at current prices, by the way. That feels right, but that's exactly what happened in Venezuela. And there's other stories too, Zimbabwe. Argentina goes through this on a regular basis, but it's not as dramatic as Zimbabwe or Venezuela's. And they go through it so often, we're just used to it. But Argentina is constantly overprinting as well. And every year they go through a cycle, and they're really in debt to the World Bank. Very scary situation to be in.
And I read a statistic yesterday that said since 1971, the U.S. dollar, when compared to gold, has lost 98% of its value. So it happens here. Has happened slowly, more in a slow motion process. And it feels like silver and gold are kind of like begrudgingly, like they have to fight for every little increase in real value, because there are some powers that have an interest in keeping the price under control, I guess we could say.
That's right. And I'll tell you what, if there weren't a paper futures market, the story of gold and silver would have been written very differently over the years. Very differently. Yeah. That's how they do it, gang. Paper futures market. And they had a good reason to start a paper futures market, so that companies could order their silver 6 months or a year in advance. I get that. That was a very good vehicle, but back then they weren't doing a ratio of like 250 to 1. Right. They do that to manipulate the price. It's that simple.
Yeah. Well, Pat, once again, we've had a fascinating conversation. On behalf of our viewer who's joined us, thank you. If they want to learn more about you, they can go to mofree.org. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's right. mofree.org. And if you're in Missouri, we deal mainly with politics, but we are also working on silver and gold legislation to make sure that it is considered legal tender in the state of Missouri. and we have reached out and helped other states in the past as well. Gold and silver is not just is important for an investment vehicle. It's actually a lifeboat when the dollar dies, for actual transactions. So, but we promote all of that within the Missouri Freedom Initiative. Ron, it's been great. It's been a long time, man. It's good to see you again. And thank you very much for everyone in the basement putting up with me.
Thank you, Pat. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
You bet. Take care, Ron. God bless you, man.